All right. You know when you stumble across a company and you're like, wait, how have I not heard of these guys before?
Happens all the time, right?
Yeah, especially in the tech world. But this one's really got my attention, Anduril. They're shaking things up in defense, and we are diving deep today.
And when we say shaking things up, we're not kidding around.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, try a $14 billion valuation with a B for a company that didn't even exist a decade ago.
It's mind-blowing, right? And their latest funding round, a cool $1.5 billion, that's Series F, for those keeping score, tells you everything you need to know about how seriously folks are taking them.
So, Series F funding, what does that even mean for those of us who aren't venture capitalists?
It basically means Anduril's gone way past the startup phase. They're playing in the big leagues now. These investors, they're not looking for a quick return. They're betting on Anduril to be a major player in defense for decades to come.
Names like Fidelity, Counterpoint Global, these are heavy hitters. It's not every day you see that kind of money flowing into defense tech, right?
Absolutely not. Anduril's doing something different, something special. They're focused on this really interesting niche autonomous weapon systems.
Okay, see, now that's where my brain goes straight to sci-fi movies. Autonomous weapons. Sound a little ominous now.
I get it. It's one of those futures now kind of things, right? But putting the ethics aside for a second, we can do a whole other deep dive on that. The tech itself is fascinating.
Yep, let's stick with the how for now. How are they actually doing this, building these things, I mean?
That's where Anduril really sets itself apart. It's not just about the hardware, though. Their hardware is seriously impressive. It's their software-first approach. They're using AI, machine learning, all that good stuff, to create systems that can basically think on their feet.
Think on their feet meaning?
Adapt to changing situations, make decisions without human intervention, that sort of thing.
Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down, but let's back up a bit. For those of us who need a little defense industry 101, how is that different from how things have always been done?
Think about it like this. Traditionally, defense contractors, they build things, physical stuff, planes, tanks, missiles. And that stuff is top of the line, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, it's still just hardware.
Okay, so where does Anduril fit in?
They're all about the software. That's the core of what they do. They're building the brains behind those systems, making them smarter, faster, and more adaptable than anything we've ever seen before.
So it's not just about building a better fighter jet. It's about building a fighter jet that can make decisions on its own in the heat of battle.
Exactly. And that's something that traditional defense contractors have really struggled with. They're used to these long, drawn-out development cycles, tons of bureaucracy. Anduril's just moving so much faster.
They're kind of like that upstart tech company that disrupts the whole industry.
Exactly. And a big part of that is their focus on agility and speed. They're not afraid to experiment, to try new things, to fail fast and iterate. It's a completely different mindset.
And speaking of doing things differently, they're building this massive new factory, right? Arsenal 1, 5 million square feet. That's bigger than Disneyland.
It's mind-boggling, but it shows you how serious they are about scaling up. They're not just building prototypes, they're gearing up for mass production.
Which is another way they're shaking things up. Traditionally, these big defense contracts, they're for a handful of incredibly expensive, highly specialized weapon systems, right?
Right. But Anduril, they're thinking more like a tech company again. Think smartphones, laptops, things like that. They want to make thousands of these autonomous systems, drive down the costs, and make them more accessible to a wider range of customers.
It's like the difference between bespoke tailoring and ready-to-wear fashion.
Perfect analogy. And it's all made possible by their modular design approach. They're using a lot of off-the-shelf technology, things you can buy online, and putting it together in new and innovative ways.
Okay, so help me out here. Modular design. What does that even mean in this context?
Basically, it means they can build a wide variety of systems using a relatively small set of standardized components.
Kind of like building with Legos.
Exactly. And that gives them a ton of flexibility. They can adapt their systems for new missions and threats much faster than their competitors who are building everything from scratch.
So they're faster, they're more adaptable, and they're thinking bigger in terms of scale. It sounds like they're ticking all the boxes for disruption. But they're not exactly playing in an empty sandbox, are they? I mean, you've got the Boeings, the Lockheed Martins, the giants of the defense industry. How does a young company like Anduril even begin to compete with those titans?
That is the question, isn't it? And it's what makes Anduril's story so fascinating. Because they're not just competing, they're starting to win.
It's got to be a bit intimidating, right? Going up against those established giants.
You'd think so. But that's the thing about Anduril. They seem to thrive on it. They're not afraid to go head-to-head with the biggest names in the business.
And they're actually winning.
Winning might be an understatement. Remember that program we talked about earlier, the one for unmanned fighter jets?
The one with Boeing. Yeah, hard to forget that one.
Well, Anduril went up against Boeing for that contract and won. They're the ones building those autonomous aircraft for the military.
Wow, that's a bold move for a company that's barely old enough to rent a car.
It is. And it speaks volumes about how Anduril's approach is being received. They're not just pitching pie-in-the-sky ideas. They're delivering.
So how are they doing it? How does a young company, even with great tech, outmaneuver these behemoths who practically invented the defense industry?
It's a few things. First, they're not afraid to be nimble. While the big guys are bogged down in bureaucracy, Anduril's making decisions quickly, pivoting when they need to. It's that whole startup mentality.
Agility is key in the tech world, that's for sure.
Exactly. And second, they're not afraid to embrace a different kind of strategy. Instead of chasing after those massive multi-billion-dollar contracts like the big players.
And ones that take a decade to complete.
Exactly. And Anduril's focusing on smaller, more agile projects, things they can develop and deploy much faster.
So it's like, instead of putting all their eggs in one basket, they're spreading your bets.
In a way, yes. They're demonstrating that you don't need to be a Boeing or a Lockheed to innovate in defense.
It's like the old saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the fight in the dog.
I like that. And Anduril's got plenty of fight in them.
So what's next for Anduril? What do they need to do to keep this momentum going?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? They've had an amazing run so far, but the real test is whether they can scale up and become a truly sustainable business. The defense industry is notoriously tough, even for the big players.
Right, it's not for the faint of heart.
No, it's not. And they're going to need to navigate a lot of challenges: competition, regulation, the constantly evolving geopolitical landscape.
And let's not forget the ethical concerns around some of this technology. Autonomous weapon systems raise a whole host of questions.
Absolutely. But putting that aside for a moment, from a purely business perspective, Anduril's journey so far has been remarkable.
It really has. They've challenged the status quo. They've forced the industry to take notice.
And they've shown that even in a space as seemingly dominated by giants as defense, there's always room for innovation, disruption, and a little bit of audacity.
Anduril's definitely got people talking, that's for sure. But the big question on everyone's mind, what happens next?
It's a nail-biter, isn't it? They've got the momentum, the tech, the attention.
But can they keep it up?
Yeah.
That's always the challenge for these young companies, right? Going from scrappy startup to industry heavyweight.
It's a whole different ballgame. They're playing chess while trying to learn the rules of checkers at the same time.
And the stakes are pretty high, right? We're not talking about the next social media app here. This is defense, national security.
No margin for error. Anduril's success or failure, it's not just about them. It has implications for the entire defense industry, for how wars might be fought in the future.
Kind of scary when you think about it like that.
A little bit, yeah. But it's also why we're so captivated by their story, I think. They're pushing the boundaries, forcing us to confront these big, uncomfortable questions.
Like, what does it even mean to have autonomous weapon systems? Who's responsible when they make decisions?
Exactly. It's a Pandora's box, ethically speaking. But again, that's a conversation for another deep dive.
For sure. But even without getting into all of that, it's clear that Anduril's shaking things up. Whether they become the next Lockheed Martin or not.
They've already changed the game.
100%. And for anyone who thought the defense industry was stuck in its ways, well.
Anduril's a wake-up call.
Big time. So where do you think they go from here? What's your prediction for Anduril, say, 5 years down the line?
5 years. In the tech world, that's a lifetime. But if I had to guess, I think they'll still be here, bigger than ever.
Still taking on the big guys.
Oh, absolutely. And probably winning more than they lose. They're too innovative, too agile to just fade away.
I agree. Anduril's story is far from over. They've already hit their mark, but this is just the beginning. Who knows what innovations and disruptions they'll come up with next? One thing's for sure, the future of defense is anything but certain.
Couldn't said it better myself.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of Anduril Industries and the future of defense. It's been an eye-opening conversation, to say the least.
I've enjoyed it.
Always a pleasure picking your brain on these topics. And as for our listeners, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep diving deep.
We'll catch you on the next one.